So in preparation for this talk, I listened to the sermon that was offered by Kyoyo Mikawa a few weeks ago on the Lotus Sutra, and I really enjoyed it. However, the reading that happened before that talk is what really grabbed me and kind of moved me to what I want to talk about today. This is the reading that was from that service. For this 1 hour, it's by Paul Dodenhoff. For this 1 hour, Spirit of Life, we let go. For this 1 hour, may we let go of our anxieties, our fears, our anger, our self-doubts, our griefs, our petty grievances, our distractions. If only for this 1 hour, let the flame of this chalice burn them from our hearts and minds and light our way to peace and serenity. For this one holy hour. That struck me, that for me, one holy hour simply was never really enough to get me to remember to actually install whatever I learned from the wisdom teachings that Sunday into my daily life. One holy hour wasn't enough. I need some methodologies besides let the flame of the chalice burn them from our hearts and minds. It's a great thought, but how do I do that? So I need more time and some methodologies. I need a way to upgrade my operating system, and meditation and mindfulness proved to be the answer for me to hit both of those. Piero Falsi, a Buddhist teacher, states, it's not difficult to be mindful. The difficulty is remembering to be mindful. I remember one of the first classes I taught, some guy in that just looked at me and said, Terry, you mean this is all about remembering to remember? And I think that's accurate, at least in part. Of course, it's important to decide what we want to be mindful of. What exactly are we installing? As you know, there's a bit of a mindfulness craze going on, right? Sometimes called Mick mindfulness. And actually, Ron Purser wrote an entire book by that title, Mick mindfulness. You hear about all kinds of things you can use mindfulness for, from ways to purchase a car, and actually to ways to shoot a gun more accurately, more precisely. From a Buddhist perspective, it isn't mindful unless it comes from a wholesome heart. It isn't mindful unless it comes from a wholesome heart, which rules out a lot of mindfulness craze stuff that you're hearing. Buddhism suggests that to have a wholesome heart, you must live from a foundational set of ethical values. And I know your congregation website, you have defined specific values that you hold as important. Specifically, you say, regard the highest values to be integrity, caring, compassion, social justice, truth, personal peace, and harmony. Advancing these values is a major purpose of our congregation. Yet, as you think about it, how often do you remember to actually live these values in your daily life? If you're like me, it's simply not often enough. For example, let's take the checkout line in the grocery store. We just had a great discussion last Tuesday evening about this in our Sangha. The small breakout group I was in came to a consensus that we very easily become very reactive when choosing the line we are going to stand in, as we eagerly try to crowd into that line where the carts are a little less full. And that we often still find ourselves being irritated, frustrated, or angry at the customers in that line, the cashier, and the bagger, if the process of checking out takes longer than we think it should take. Our thoughts, words, and gestures can be less than skillful, and certainly not leading from the values that we just talked about. Do any of you resonate with that? We discussed that for some of us, that we found that our daily practice, we have learned to remember more frequently, to notice what is happening, and then adjust our response so that we are living our desired values while standing in that darn line. For example, during my daily practice, I'll remind myself of the values I hold dear. I literally state them in my mind, and I often set an intention to emphasize one or more of them during the upcoming day. So if I know I'm going to that grocery store, I include the intention of, I'm going to stand in that checkout line compassionately. That could mean simply having a smile on my face, or perhaps allowing someone to cut in front of me if they only have a few items in their cart, or sincerely thanking the cashier and the bagger, wishing them a good day. Now, I have to admit that I still often react mentally, and occasionally then I have to refine my less than skillful mental thoughts that happened to something more like, may you be happy, or may you live with ease, if that person is cutting in front of me. I kind of fake it until I make it. And I remember that other more compassionate things I can still do while I'm in that line. And now I have to say, after a few months and really actually a few years of remembering to remember, I occasionally, when I'm in that checkout line, my first thought when someone cuts in front or it's taking longer for me to check out is, may I live with ease. May I be happy. I don't have to reframe it as often. It is automatically there. That automaticity is what gives me faith that I can upgrade my operating system. If I remember to live my values, and I know what values I want to live. So having a daily practice increases the likelihood that I will pause before I react and remember my values, and then hopefully react more skillfully using those values during my daily life. But how does my daily sitting on a cushion do that? During my daily meditation or practice, I use my breath to notice what is really happening in my mind. Now, sometimes you hear that thoughts are your enemy during meditation. Well, I don't really think that's accurate. I think thoughts are the key to getting to know yourself so that you then can learn your habit patterns so that you then can respond more skillfully, perhaps counter to those habitual thoughts that keep coming, that come from how we've learned to live our lives, for me, the last 73 years. So using breath and notice my thoughts is one of the things every morning I do. And during my meditation time, while sitting on that cushion, for me, I can't sit on it anymore because I can't get up so easily, so it's a chair. I encounter thoughts, even during that sitting time, that aren't so skillful, but I'm not so proud of. Just like I do throughout my day, standing in that check-in line or driving my car. That's another one I have to set regular intentions for. But during this daily practice, I've learned to sit and just notice for that 20 to 30 minutes. And most importantly, do nothing. Just be with it. Just watch. A story might come up in my mind, which I'm still upset about, something that happened the night before or a week ago. Or I might notice a really luscious breeze caressing my face. I just sit with these types of experiences and see what happens in my mind. I practice not reacting to my mental and physical experiences. I practice not storying my upsetting thoughts and not grasping for the good ones to stay longer. I just sit with whatever is. And that practice on that chair every morning for 20 minutes then carries over into my daily life. And I might be standing in that line and I just take a deep breath. I don't think about it. I just notice I'm taking a deep breath and I remember compassion. And sometimes that happens automatically. I've upgraded my operating system a bit. It's got a long way to go, but it works. And I have faith that it works because I feel it changed my life and I'm living more skillfully. So to summarize, my daily practice helps me start to notice much more regularly and without thinking throughout my daily life experiences what my mind is thinking before I react. This then gives me time to make a choice of how I want to react and remember the values that I hold in my heart. My practice empowers me to live my values more completely. We can upgrade our operating system, but for me, it takes more than one holy hour. It takes a practice.
There's a lot of things in life that we get the instructions and they don't really make sense, or they don't really get us to our goal. And for me, to be honest, one of those things was meditation. You know, I had many meditation lessons, listened to the guided recordings, read the books, went to the retreats, and I did sort of what Terry was saying. I had my one holy hour, and then after that, I would just be right back to sort of my habitual, sort of anxious, irritable way of being, and that's just my default. And I would just be back to that, and it didn't really stick. So the turning point for me was when Terry started our mindfulness group about 8 years ago. And every Tuesday night since then, we've listened to a wisdom talk. We call them dharma talks. And we find these people, wonderful teachers who put it out so generously on the internet. And we've learned a lot. These teachers sort of use basic Buddhist principles, add some Western psychology, a lot of practical strategies of how to really install mindfulness into our lives. I call them the wisdom practices. And for me, that's made all the difference. So I really live more mindfully because of them. There are so many. In fact, the title of this sermon of the service was Many Roads to Inner Peace. And we titled it that way because there are so many ways we can bring wisdom to our lives. So the one I'm going to share today is the idea of creating what's called the spaciousness practice. Spaciousness is, in the biggest framework, it's just sort of making more space in our minds. And I'll start with Pema Chodron is one of the famous Buddhist teachers, and this is one of her most famous quotes. This is from Pema. "We think the point is to pass the test or overcome the problem, but the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together, they fall apart. They come together again, they fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy. And the letting there be room is the spaciousness practice. And what I love specifically about this quote is the whole first part of coming apart and falling, coming together and falling apart and coming together, falling apart. That is, that coming together part, that's what I like to call fixing. And in life, we have to fix. It's essential. I mean, we have to take care of our bodies, our relationships, our jobs, our homes, our children. There's a lot of things we have to be working on. It's essential. And it's the second part of this quote that makes all the difference, is then she says, is that we need to let there be room for all of this to happen. And what she's saying is, to me at least, what she's saying is in the midst of all of this fixing, we're going to have emotions and we're going to have reactions and we're going to get intense. And especially when things are complicated or when we have way too much on our plate, that's when we're much less likely to be able to manage it. We don't have the space to handle it. And so for me, what I like to remind myself is that when I find myself getting flung from emotion to emotion to emotion, or when I find that I'm just randomly escalating throughout a day, it's a signal that I need to make more space in my mind. There's an illustration of spaciousness someone taught me many years ago that really stuck. Imagine you have a glass of water and you have a teaspoon of red food color and you put that in the water, and of course the water turns red. And then you take that same teaspoon of red food color and you put it in a big lake. And of course the lake is not going to turn red. And the lesson is that we are not the glass of water, we are the lake. We are so much more than this bound up part of ourselves. And having said that, this bound up part of ourselves can be really challenging. I mean, I know for me, I think for all of us, when we're angry or sad or irritated or anxious, it's hard to get past this glass of water. It's hard to see the whole lake, really hard. And I think that's where the mindfulness practice comes in, that if we can build that lake while things are calmer and use our practice to put much more into our lake, we're much more likely to be able to go through these difficulties with less intensity and to have more space in our minds to go through it. One of the affirmations that I like to use, or an intention we can set any day, any time, or 100 times a day, is just to remind ourselves that we are wider than whatever is happening in this moment. There's more to me than whatever is happening in this moment, and that I am bigger than whatever might arise. That's a really nice intention that I like to set a lot. To be clear, though, we're not walking away from the difficulty. There's a main tenet in Buddhism is life has difficulty. There's no getting around it. We have to allow it to be here. In fact, the reason we have to allow it to be here is because difficulty is going to be here whether we allow it or not. So we might as well make room for it. It's just the lesson is that while it's here, there's more to the story. There's always more. Aside from whatever's bound up in, there's more to what's happening in our lives. There's more to our personality. There's more to the people that we're talking to. There's other ways to look at it. Sometimes there's just better ways to hold ourselves as we go through it. There's a lot more that we can put in this space. So the spaciousness is not just one thing. There's a lot we can put here. For me, something I like to do, a real nice one that works for me, is when I'm feeling sort of anxious or overwhelmed, which are common for me. I like to remind myself that in addition to those things, I also have strength, and I have kindness, and I have joy, and I have resilience. We are all so much more than this contracted part of ourselves. That's the spaciousness lesson. Another really important thing to put in this space is the idea of self-compassion. That's the book. There's a book called Radical Compassion by Tara Brach, and that the whole thing is to add self-compassion to our practice. And that if we can approach the difficulty with a more tender heart and a more kind understanding and just a gentler way, we open up the possibility that more space gets created because we're doing it in a softer, more gentler way. There's an expression that Tara Brach uses. She says, it just works for almost everything. She just says, just go to your edge and soften it. Go to your edge and soften it. That for me, just saying those words often just creates an instant moment of having more space in my mind. So the big benefit of the spaciousness practice is that we end up living our lives we're like steering our lives from our whole selves, rather than steering our lives from the contracted part of ourselves. If we end up steering from this contracted part of ourselves, what's going to happen is we're probably not going to make the best decisions or have the best behaviors. And if we're steering from our whole self with this more gentle, loving way within us, we're probably going to end up with much better outcomes. In fact, all that fixing we're doing is probably going to happen in a more mindful and wholehearted way. So I'd like to close with a quote by Viktor Frankl. He was an author and Holocaust survivor, and this is one of his famous quotes. In between the stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power and our freedom. May we each be aware that we always have an invitation to pause, to make space in our minds, to soften our edges, and to offer more kindness and compassion to ourselves and to those around us. Namaste. Amen.